if you go back to some of the things that you said at the outset, uh, and I guess a lot of the questions pursue this now at the conclusion. What really is the scope of conjectural history? Um, I think that a question that I have really is, it seems that it is a common denominator is a search for something new. It's a way to get something new, either for reputational purposes, for purposes of discovery. If you have a problem that is not amenable to a clean empirical or historical solution. Um, but if you then say, well, what is it that we're trying to define the scope of? What is conjectural history? Is it a methodology that's specific to history? Is it a methodology that's applied in history? And methodology really kind of takes you to this infinitely broad scope. So you kind of think, well, it's a search for something new, a new development. It may maybe have different forms for different subject matters, but if you wanted to become more rigorous about it, what would you say? How would you characterize uh, conjecture as a methodology that can then be structured? Getting back to McKeon and the Common Core and his ideas and methods, how does methodology help you define both the scope and perhaps some of the properties of conjecture?
Method's tough because no two of these people actually agree when you press them on what the method of conjectural history is. But I would say there's a set of things that go together. One is you want to argue something about the past, and you need a genre to do it in because you don't have a genre. It's not what history does. It's not what commentary does. What is the genre? And the genre can be little treatises in epistolary form, like the ones about Rome, or orations, which is the most directly rhetorical form, as in Vala, or you can, as Acosta did, experiment with the rules for history itself. But you're trying to write something which it's not immediately obvious how you would do it. If you want to write about how bad things happen when a constitution goes pear-shaped, you just go back and read Sallust's Catiline, and then you say, okay, now I know how to write this. But you don't have a Sallust's Catiline for this stuff. And I think that is highly significant. That part of it is, it's unified by what it's not. It's not a history of Rome. It's a set of historical arguments about Rome. It's not a history of Spain, as Morales says. It's a set of arguments about the history of Spain. And that's negative, but I think it's still significant. It is, I also would never want to suggest that conjectural history is like a good thing. Conjectural history is used for many evil purposes. Acosta uses it to decide who's a barbarian and who isn't, for example. And he's not the first or the only one to do that, but it's hard to feel he's too pleased to find your guy doing that. And, a lot of conjectural history comes in the time of, European imperial and economic expansion, and is meant to portray that as a good and natural sort of consequence. When I was in Gen Ed, we had that awful book by Rostow, The Stages of Economic. Yeah, we were takeoff. We were made to take off with Rostow. And I think, that's like the last blast of that kind of conjectural history. And we all hated it, I may say, including our teachers. As with Gen Ed, it was always the case in the old days that you never knew why you were reading anything. The staff didn't know why you were reading. The students didn't know why we were reading. And many great discussions about conjecturally trying to explain why we were reading a given thing or not. But so I think you need a way of addressing past issues that the existing genres don't really give you. And in many ways, Cicero's Brutus is kind of the closest thing to a full-blown work that is the sort of thing that conjecturalists want to do, though they don't often. There are some dialogues that actually try to do this, but beyond that, I'm leery of trying to define it too closely. I think my actors see it both as an identifiable kind of genre or set of genres, a set of approaches, and as an identifiable set of practices. And I think that, in a way, the really interesting question is the one Rainey asks, is when does that stop? When do you, and one of the final points, I'll just look at, last point is, the other thing is conjectural history goes out with a blast. And this is a possible ending. I try to argue here that a lot of it comes out of philology. It comes out of teaching of classics, teaching of rhetoric, philological argument. At the end of the 18th century, two revolutionary books on the ancient world appear: Winckelmann's History of Greek Art, of Ancient Art, and Wolff's Prolegomata to Homer. They're both conjectural histories. They are both richly informed by the reading that they had done in both the scholarly traditions and the new traditions of philosophical history writing. And they completely blow classics and ancient history and aesthetics and many other things into pieces. So that might be a nice, if for a ring composition, it might be nice to start in humanism and end in what are perhaps the last great humanist efforts at a kind of conjectural history. But that's just one thought. At any rate, thank you. It's a hard question. I do think about it a lot. If I had more and better answers, I would not deny you them.
On that note, I think Tony's more than earned his glass of wine. So I just want to say thank you.